Hey y'all, I'm Hope. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm starting a journey slash experiment that I'm very excited for because I'm going to be exploring the horror manga genre. Basically, I started reading horror and manga around the same time. They were both pretty new to me, and I've really been enjoying my time in both the horror genre and reading manga. I've mostly been reading like popular series there, but I really wanted to dive further into horror manga because I've been reading a lot of Junji Ito, and while I really love his work, I know that there is so much more out there, and I really want to be exploring further and finding other artists and other writers that I like. So this has been in the making for quite a while. I posted a video, I think in 2021, where I requested recommendations for horror manga, and I got one comment on there with several recommendations. So shout out to Dice's 19 Hearts. She sent me so many recommendations, and I'm so excited to be diving into those. I've been having a little bit of trouble finding them locally, so there's a few that I'm hopeful I'll be able to find further down the road, mostly because my Barnes & Noble does not seem to be stocking any of them. But I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that. So I have one recommendation from her. I also got a recommendation from my partner, and then there's one that I found online that I just want to try because it's kind of caught my attention, caught my curiosity, and sometimes the curiosity gets the better of me. So that's kind of my plan for today, and for the next little while is I want to try and read these and just see what I think, because I really would love to explore this particular... Is it a genre? Is it a subgenre? I don't know what to call it. I'm also very tired today, and apologies if I start coughing. I still have a post-viral cough from a cold that I had like 3 weeks ago, which I'm prone to getting those, so apologies if there's a lot of me clearing my throat. I'm going to try and cut it out as much as I can. But anyway, the recommendation I have from Dice's 19 Hearts is Phantom Tales of the Night by Matsuri, which I'm very excited for. It looks like this is a sort of supernatural horror thing where there is an inn that you can stay in, and they don't accept normal payment, but instead you have to pay with one of your darkest secrets. That sounds super interesting to me, and I flipped through the first few pages, and there's some interesting, like, monster designs that I'm excited to see where all of this is going, and, like, I'm just very hyped to read this. This was the one I did find just immediately when I went to my local Barnes & Noble. My local indie bookstore doesn't really carry manga, so I haven't been able to like find any there. But I'm very excited to dive into this one. And I think of the three that I have, this is the one I'm like... I think is the highest likelihood to be a 5-star for me, only because it aligns with other things that I've read and other things I've been interested in. So I'm very excited to dive into this one, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to find some of her other recommendations because she had quite a few for me and they sounded really interesting. So fingers crossed I'm able to do like another episode of this later down the road when I can get my hands on some of those. The recommendation that I got from my partner, who is currently just in a manga phase, he's been enjoying it a lot lately and just devouring it, so obviously I wanted to get a recommendation from him, and he recommended Shibata Ryan, which is something about like a guy who's buried beneath a tree or like next to a tree, and some kid at this like local high school finds him, and things go from there. That's all I know, and it sounds really weird and interesting, and my partner definitely said it was like mostly very weird, so I'm curious to see how I end up feeling about that one, just because it sounds like it's very different from other things that I've read. And the last one I've got here is actually manhwa rather than manga, and it's one that's been kind of floating around the internet for a while. I think it's a little bit controversial, and my curiosity's just gotten the better of me. I want to know why people are talking about this particular series so much, but I have the first volume of Killing Stalking by Kugi, and I apologize if I mispronounced that. It just occurred to me I probably should have looked that up before I said it. But this one is a psychological horror from what I've read, but it's also boys love, which is an interesting combination. I did see an interview with the author where she mentions that this is specifically an abusive relationship that no one should aspire to, so I am going in with expectations that this is going to lean on the side of psychological horror, and I'm curious to see how I feel about it, just because I've been seeing this everywhere for a couple of years, and I don't really know what to expect here, other than I know it's going to be very dark, I know it's going to be very gory, and I also believe there's some sexual content in here that I'm going to guess is probably a little bit questionable. So I'm curious to see how I end up feeling about this one. This is the one I think I'm least likely to enjoy, but I do like a psychological horror, so I thought this would be an interesting one to include, just because I've seen it so many different places. So those are the three I'm going to be reading, and I think it's going to be a nice mix of different kind of subgenres of horror and different styles. So I'm excited to dive into all of these, and I will check back in with you guys when I have finished the first book. So I read Killing Stalking last night. I read this with my friend group. We did like a hangout in our cursed book server, and I read the entirety of this with them, and I have had the weirdest experience with this book. And I feel so incredibly neutral about it. Like, I figured that this would be something that I would read, that I would feel like very strongly for or against it. And I just don't. I feel so neutral about this book. And I filmed something last night kind of talking about this, but I was very tired and I don't think it was coherent. So I wanted to kind of come back now that I've had some time to sleep on it, some time to think about it this morning, and try to put into words why I feel neutral on this book. And I think it's that it's supposed to be shocking. It's very much bad things happening to this guy just like over and over and over again. But I think the whole thing is just very one note. We don't have any kind of like build up to the violence. There's not like a kind of a growing tension. There's at the very beginning, there's like a little brief bit that suggests there might be some like police investigation into what's going on with Song-woo, but we don't get very much of that at all. They disappear after like chapter 2. And so the whole book, basically from the first, I don't know, like page 10, page 15, is just Yunbum being subjected to horrific violence. And I get what this is going for, but I think because of how much violence there is in it, the things that are supposed to be very shocking in here don't come across as shocking because it's all like one emotional valence. There's not like kind of lulls in what's happening. There is even a section that's kind of, there's more of a domestic situation happening, and it seems like there should be kind of a calmer moment. But throughout that whole situation, that whole section, it seems kind of at first glance to be a little bit calmer than the rest of the book. There's still these like horrifically violent hallucinations that Yunbum is having, and there's also a lot of discussion in there about their like individual backstories, which are very, again, violent and upsetting. So it just is all one kind of emotional tone throughout the entire book. And I came away from it feeling like because of that, I did not have the experience that the author intended me to have with this. I get the feeling that it's supposed to be shocking and disturbing and upsetting, and I feel weird saying this, but I spent most of this book laughing, and I think it's because of the way that the violence is presented and the fact that it is so over the top just constantly, and the way that it is presented as things that are happening. You kind of reach this point of like, I would say like desensitization to what's happening to Yunbum like fairly quickly. At least that was my experience, that I very quickly was like, okay, well, immediately bad things are happening to him, and the bad things do not stop for the entirety of this. So it started to get just kind of like over the top and silly in a way that I was like, I know I'm not supposed to be laughing at this, but it's coming across like very dark comedy instead of psychological horror. So I think I just really did not have the intended experience with this book. That being said, I think if the premise is interesting to you, maybe it's worth picking up and trying out, as long as you're okay with like gore. There's also a lot of, there's some sexual content, although it's actually fairly censored, which I thought was really interesting because the violence is not censored at all. There is just like straight up blood and gore on the page, but the sexual content is censored in a very interesting way. But I found this just like a very strange reading experience. Also because Song-woo is just terrible from the start. Like there isn't even, I think, any point where he comes across as being like maybe kind of reasonable or kind of lost in his own way. He's just kind of awful right from the get-go. The other thing I want to mention that I think will impact your experience with this book as well is that this has got a lot of homophobia in it, especially from Song-woo. He is very homophobic. He's also very misogynist. And I don't think there's any kind of question for him of like, who am I? What do I want to be? It doesn't seem to be like coming from a place of like lashing out because he's kind of soul searching or anything. It's just, he's terrible. Like he's a serial killer and he's just awful. And I feel like I get why that's there, but I think it goes just like a little bit beyond what is necessary to get the point across about what kind of a person Songwoo is. So I just want to put that out there. There is a lot of homophobia and misogyny in here, so be aware of that going in. I do think there's a couple of interesting moments where we start to get some hints that there might be some investigation in future, but there just isn't any in this particular book. There's like one cop at the very beginning who's like, I don't know, I think he's a little bit sketchy, and that's kind of it. I think this book would have benefited from being less linear and more like maybe timelines happening, like maybe like a dual timeline, or not even really like a dual timeline. My friend and I have been talking about this. Maybe something where there's like, we're starting kind of in media res, starting with Yunbum already in the situation, and then kind of getting some flashbacks to how he got here, and having some of what happens at the beginning be a twist later, I think would have worked really well, because you just kind of know from the start that Yunbum is a stalker, he's been stalking Songwoo, and then he gets caught in Songwoo's house. That's literally the premise on the back of the book, and it just proceeds from there. So there isn't really any kind of like driving question or piece of intrigue that's pulling the story along. It's really just like, what horrible thing is going to happen to Yunbum next? And I don't find that like super compelling. There are a couple of clues that start to crop up partway through that seem like there is going to be more of an investigation like timeline, or like a perspective. I think there's a cop who is introduced here who's maybe going to be one of the perspectives later on in the series, but I'm just like not even sure if I want to continue with it, if I think it's going to be worth it. I'm considering giving it one more volume at some point in the future, just to see if the investigation element helps, because I did read the description for book 2, and it looks like that is kind of the core of the second book, is that there's a cop who starts to kind of dig into what's going on with Songwoo. So I think that there is potential there for there to be more intrigue, but this is just so linear and so non-mysterious that I think that there's not really much pulling you through this, except the fact that it's short and it's quick and it's easy to read. Assuming that you're okay with like blood and gore and stuff, because like easy to read in the sense that it's fast to read, not necessarily easy to read in the sense that it is like cozy or comfortable content. It is very much not. So I think this was just a really weird reading experience, and it's not something I think I could recommend really based on my experience with it. I'll have to see if I decide to read book 2 of this, if I feel differently when I've gotten further into the story, and maybe this is just like all set up. I don't know. It feels so linear and so straightforward and just so one note throughout the whole thing that I just feel like there's nothing there for me to kind of like latch onto or care about, other than like I kind of feel bad for this guy who's being menaced by a serial killer, but you kind of reach a point of like oversaturation with what's happening to him. So yeah, that one's a really hard one to kind of talk about or rate. I'm actually not going to rate it. I don't feel like I have a sense of like 3 stars feels wrong. Neutral would be like 3 stars, but that doesn't really fit my like feelings about the book. But I also don't necessarily feel like it's a 1 or 2 or like a 4 or a 5. It's just, I feel neutral about it. So I'm not going to be rating this book. And I will see in future if I decide to come back to this series and kind of see what happens in the future volumes. But for now, I think I'm going to move on to the next book in this video. And I think my next one is going to be Phantom Tales of the Night, because this is very short. It'll be really quick for me to get through. I might try to get through it later today. We'll kind of see how things shake out. I've got a little bit of work I need to get done this afternoon. But I think this one sounds like it's going to be really interesting. It's very supernatural horror sounding. The back says, "Welcome to Murakumo Inn, a curious establishment that opens its doors to the troubled masses, human or otherwise. But the equally curious innkeeper takes compensation only in the form of one's darkest secrets. Who will come calling today?" So I think that sounds so fun, and I think this is going to be where I'm going to go next, and then I'll leave Shibata for the end of the video. But like, I'm excited to read this. I think it's going to be fun, and I'm really hoping that I have a better experience with this than I did with Killing Stalking, because honestly I'm a little bit disappointed in my experience there. So I'm really hoping that this is going to kind of redeem this experiment for me. Well, I have successfully finished my next read, which is Phantom Tales of the Night, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. So this is looking up for this video. I had a great time reading this. This is following this strange place called the Murakumo Inn that only appears to people at like very specific moments when something strange is happening to them, or when they're wanting something in particular. And there is the owner of this inn, this guy on the cover, who collects people's secrets. And so this is following 4 different stories of times that someone or something has ended up at the inn, and how the owner has kind of peeled apart their secrets, or how one of his two like sidekicks, Butterfly and Spider, have kind of assisted in that endeavor. And the owner is this interesting figure because he is like, at times he almost seems benevolent, but then he'll do something that's just a little bit on the creepy side. You're like, okay, I'm not really sure if you're a good guy or not. I think that's really the tone of this too, is that you're never really quite sure who is good and who is bad here, because it's unclear if the owner is some sort of benevolent entity that is actually trying to help people and is just kind of like being creepy about it, or if he's some sort of malevolent entity that is like harming people and like isolating them for specific reasons. So it's kind of fun because I don't really have a sense of how I'm supposed to feel about the owner yet. He's really interesting, he's really creepy, and his two sidekicks are really fun and also have their own individual backstories and very different personalities, so I'm enjoying that we're getting a little bit more information about them as well. And I was really excited when I realized this volume comes full circle, so the first story in this and the last story are connected, and there is going to be some sort of overarching plot of this guy we meet near the end, who is a kind of monster slayer type character. So I'm excited to see where this is going to go next. I just had a lot of fun reading this, and I think the art is really great. And another little like detail that I really like is that frequently in the background there's like a word in Japanese that denotes some sort of like sound, and rather than translating all of them, the first time that word comes up, and I'm trying to see if I can find an example, the first time the word comes up, the background will have like a little parentheses with the like definition. Here's one word. There's something, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it visible, but here it says like the word and then it says refreshed in parentheses under it. So it'll have that, it'll be like kind of a tone marker or like something that denotes an action, or sometimes there's ones where I saw one that said like had the word rip, and it had it in Japanese and then also the translation in English, and then it just will give you the brief translation and then continue using the Japanese word. So I just thought that was really interesting that it's using, or that it's like giving you that little description, but not like, it's trusting you to remember what those words are, and I just think it's neat that it kept that little detail in, and I thoroughly enjoyed that when I noticed it. It took me, I think, into like the second story before I realized that was happening, but I just thought it was a little fun background detail, and I'm just thoroughly enjoying this. I'm very excited to see what happens next. I will be continuing on with this series. I'm curious to find out what's going to happen with this new Slayer character that's been introduced, and I want to know more about the owner and about his two sidekicks. So I'm having a great time, and I'm excited to continue on with the series. So next I'm going to be moving on to reading Shibata, and I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to get to this. I'm also not sure if I'm going to read the whole thing. I think it's like 20 something chapters. I might read like 10 chapters or so and then kind of check in at that point. But I'm excited to read this one because my partner really likes it. It's one that he's currently keeping up with, and I'm just curious to see what it's about because it sounds like super weird and very different. So I'm looking forward to that. But for now, I actually need to get some more homework done, and I will probably be reading Shibata in the next couple of days, hopefully. Another day, another manga finished. I am totally caught up now with Shibata. I've read the entirety of the 22 chapters that are currently available. I just read them via Manga Plus, so I think I'm gonna mark both volumes 1 and 2 as read on my Goodreads, because there's 2 volumes listed on Goodreads as like being in existence, but I haven't been able to find like a list of which chapters are in which volume. So I'm just gonna mark them both as read. I feel like that's reasonable since I read all 22 chapters, but I had a good time with this. This is a very weird series, and I'm not entirely sure where to start or how to talk about it, but I had a great time with it. This is such a weird manga. This is about this guy named Sato, who one day meets a guy named Shibata who is buried next to a tree, and he like digs him up. They become like friends, and they form a friendship. That's what I was trying to say, both of those things at the same time. They form a friendship, and then everything kind of kicks off from there, and it just gets very, very weird very, very fast. I think the arc of chapter 1 kind of gives you the backstory on their friendship, and then it jumps to like present day, and we get the actual events of the series, and it is just such a bizarre series that is like based in movies, and it's got like, it's clearly pulling a lot of inspiration from different horror movies, and then it just has so many twists and turns. I don't even know what I can say without spoiling anything for you, because it goes so many different directions. It also does some interesting things with having conversations about like conformity and what that does to a person, about like identity formation and the pressure to conform. There's also some like eco-criticism happening in there. There was another thing it's now escaping me, but there's like some very big conversations that are happening in it. And I just was really impressed with the way it kind of like weaves those things together, because it doesn't feel like it should work, but it does. I think I am going to give this a 4 stars opposed to a 5-star, just because I feel like there's a few things that went a little bit over my head. Maybe would have like worked better if I had like had some more familiarity with some movies it was riffing on. Also might have worked better if I wasn't so like confused for the first few volumes, or first few chapters I should say. There's a lot going on in the first few chapters. It kind of takes a little while to get to grips with what the heck is going on, and then it's pretty linear from that point forward. But yeah, I had a really good time with this. I think it's really fun, and I will definitely be continuing to read this one. I think it's still serializing. I think there's a new chapter coming out on Wednesday. It's currently Monday, and I think this Wednesday is the next new chapter. So I will be reading that. I'm very interested to see where the story is going to go, especially because where chapter 22 leaves off, I'm not really sure where it can go from there. So I'm curious to see where it's going to go next, just because I'm not at all sure what there is left to have happen here. It just twists in so many different directions, and I think some of the characters are interesting. That's the other thing I'm going to give it a 4-star for, is that some of the characters are fairly flat. And it also likes to do that thing where it like introduces someone just to kill them off like immediately, and I feel like some of those would be more impactful if I had more of a sense of who those characters were and why they were important. It does kind of circle back to some of those deaths, but I just feel like some of the characters are a little bit flat. It also does this thing where there's a character who's a crush on another character, and she's weirdly like possessive over him, and there's this sense that like if he were to like progress his friendship with this other guy, she would be jealous of that. Like she would, I don't know, it was just a little bit uncomfortable like relationship dynamics there. So there was a little bit of flat characterization, some weird relationship dynamics, but other than that, again, had a great time. I highly recommend this if you like kind of weird horror, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next. So I have successfully read all 3 of the horror manga I was hoping to get to, and I'm really pleased because this is perfect timing. Tomorrow a readathon starts that I'm going to be hopefully participating in and vlogging, but I am glad to say that I liked 2/3 of what I read. So just as a quick summary wrap-up thing, I started off with Killing Stalking, which I'm holding backwards, and I want to come back to this just because I said that I wasn't going to rate this, and I actually am going to. I'm giving it a 2 stars. I feel very neutral about it, but lean towards it not being paced very well. I'm considering reading volume 2 just because I know there's going to be more investigation elements, and I'm hoping that might improve some aspects of the story, but I'm not like excited about continuing this. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to give this a 2 stars just because I think that it's fine, but 3 stars just feels too high, because 3 stars I generally would give to a book that I like enjoyed, and I don't know that I can say I enjoyed this book. I don't know that I should be anyway, because it's really dark and really fucked up. But yeah, I am going to be giving that a 2 stars. So that was pretty disappointing just because I'd been seeing it everywhere, and I was hopeful that I would have more strong feelings on it. But then I did really enjoy the next thing I read, which was Phantom Tales of the Night. Gave it 4 stars. I am looking forward to reading more from this series, and I think this one's just like a lot of fun. It's a little bit creepy, a little bit sinister, but also just like a lot of fun. And there's a little bit of backstory that started to be revealed, so I'm curious to see what's going to happen with some of these characters and what more we're going to learn about them. So I am really enjoying this, and I will be continuing on with Phantom Tales of the Night. And then Shibata also getting 4 stars. I will be continuing on with this one as well because it's just such a wild and crazy story, and I enjoyed the heck out of this. So I'm really glad that I ended up having 2 total that I ended up really liking and that I'll be continuing with. I am hoping to do another episode of this at some point with some other horror manga, I guess, pretty obviously, given this is about horror manga. Anyway, don't mind me. I'm clearly just slowly losing my ability to words, but I am hoping to do another episode at some point. I'm just trying to figure out how to source some of the manga that I want to read. I'm kind of looking at Another by Yukito Ayatsuji is one that I'm really interested in. It comes in both like light novel and manga formats, and I'm hoping to find the manga, but the light novel is the only one I've been able to like find physically anywhere, so I'm kind of looking into that. I'm also considering Corpse Party and Toyo Game as some that I'm interested in picking up. Those were all ones that were recommended to me by Dices19, so I may do another episode that's like just some of her recommendations, or I might get another recommendation from Jacob. Actually, I just remembered he gave me another one that I hadn't been able to find, but I'm gonna keep looking for it. Something like the 100 Ghost Stories Ended My Life or something. So I have some other ones that I'm hoping to get to, and I'm enjoying this a lot. I'm looking forward to reading some more as well, and continuing on with these two series that I did really like. So that's pretty much all I have for you today, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any recommendations for horror manga, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to get some more recommendations. Again, I want to do another episode of this at some point. But if you like this video, I hope you'll consider giving a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.